Gianni, thank you for listening to the Station of the Cross, proclaiming the fullness of truth with clarity and charity.
Heard around the world on your Android and Apple mobile devices.
A child murder referendum will be before Florida voters this November. What do you need to know? And much more with special guest Pam Stenzel today on The Simple Truth. We consecrate everything to the Sacred Heart of Jesus through the Immaculate Heart of Mary and the Pure Strong Heart of St. Joseph. A special episode today with a special guest. It's Pam Stenzel. She is founder of Enlighten Communications, enlighten.com. She has spent her entire adult life working with women experiencing crisis pregnancies, advocating for life, and helping young people live lives of sexual integrity. She's been a regular speaker for us at the National Men's March to Abolish Abortion Rally for Personhood, the next event of which is going to be taking place in Rochester, New York on Saturday, June 22nd, themensmarch.com. Pam is planning to be with us there as well. So come on out to the event and you'll get to hear Pam speak live there. Again, themensmarch.com for more information on that. But Pam Stenzel, welcome back to The Simple Truth. Thank you for being with us today. How are you?
Oh, it's good to be with you. Thanks, Jim. Very concerned about what's going on in Florida. So I'm glad to be able to have that conversation with you today.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you for being here. And I think you were with us. It was a couple years ago now. I was going back and trying to find it. I was watching it today. In fact, your testimony that you shared with us on a past Testimony Tuesday was back late 2021. And really great stuff. So I would encourage people to go back and find that episode to learn more about Pam's story. But maybe some more of that will come out as we go here today. I would like to start with it in the sense of, Pam, you're in the trenches in Florida. So tell us first what it is that you do, and then what it's like and what you're seeing right now in Florida.
Yeah, so I got involved in pro-life very young, and as all of us do, I think we all have personal reasons for becoming involved in the pro-life movement, and obviously mine stems from my beginning, because 9 years ago a young 15-year-old girl became pregnant, had a lot of difficult choices to make, maybe more so than some teen girls in that position, because she was raped, but she chose to give me my life and then gave me my family through adoption. And I am so grateful for her through those 9 months, and to honor my life by doing that, as well as then, knowing that she wasn't what was best for me and giving me my amazing family. I often tell people that, my biological father is a rapist, but I did not deserve the death penalty because of the crime of my biological father. And my life isn't worth less than anyone else's simply because of the way I was conceived. And I think I delved into working with women experiencing crisis pregnancies back in college, mostly because I really, I believed at the time in my heart that what really needed to happen for women who experienced the trauma that my own birth mother had experienced was that she be given help and hope, and that someone would walk alongside her and love her. What a woman experiencing a crisis pregnancy, especially as a result of trauma, doesn't need is to have violence, add violence to more violence by ripping her baby from her womb. What she needed was someone to love her, to come alongside her, to provide hope and help, and to not abandon her. And so I started doing that as a volunteer in college, and then really felt that God called me to that ministry, and spent probably 9 years working in pregnancy help centers in the Minneapolis area following college. And while I was doing that, while I was working with women experiencing crisis pregnancy, offering hope and help, doing the pregnancy testing on young teen girls, I realized that we had a lot of young people out there making decisions about sex with absolutely zero understanding of what the consequences of their choices were. And when I would talk to these young girls about not only pregnancy as a consequence of sex outside of marriage, but certainly the bigger consequence of STI infection and their risk to their future fertility and all of those things. I was astounded by what they didn't know. And so, Jim, I learned that when you complain too long to the Holy Spirit about what isn't being told and why people don't know something and where is the information, that usually he'll just put his finger on your heart and say, well, then you do it then. Stop whining about who's not telling the truth. And you start doing it. And that kind of launched me into many years of speaking to students about sexual integrity and chastity. And then I got a little bit old and decided to move from Minnesota to Florida, and then became involved back again here in Florida with the community pregnancy clinics. And we have 5 clinics that we operate across Southwest and Central Florida. And I was involved in the opening of the clinic at University of Florida in Gainesville. And so that's kind of where I've spent a lot of my focus the last couple of years. But it's very fascinating to see what's going on our university campuses. And of course, that's kind of the epicenter for all of these issues. So it's been, because I've been so involved with women experiencing pregnancies and crisis pregnancies and on the college campus, when Dobbs went down and we all cheered. I was at a Catholic pro-life camp out in Los Angeles. We had amazing pro-life leaders there when Dobbs went down. I'll never forget. It was early in the morning in California, and screaming was happening from my cabin. I thought something was on fire, and I ran in there, and it was just the girl screaming about the fact that the Dobbs decision had come down. And I think a certain amount of people kind of felt like, oh, wow, isn't this great? The decision to, now abortion's going to be illegal in all of our states. And the reality is it did nothing of the sort. And I think the battle that has ensued since that time has gotten worse, and certainly the battle for language. And I think that's what we're dealing with in Florida, because we passed a 6-week, they call it a 6-week ban. It's not. And it wouldn't go into effect, even the very terrible law. Oh, it's not a good law. It's a 6-week ban with the exceptions for rape, incest, health of the mother, and then also human trafficking. They added human trafficking into this ban as an exception, which was just insane. So the law is unenforceable as it stands. And with all these loopholes, the abortion industry has been well prepared for the moment that it would take effect. Well, it didn't take effect until in Florida. That law that passed a year ago did not take effect. It was not to be taken effect until the Supreme Court of Florida ruled that our 15-week ban, which was even worse and even more horrifying, until that was ruled as constitutional, so to say. And so we waited forever for that to happen. And the sad thing that happened in Florida is that the Supreme Court waited until, when was it, Jim? It was February, wasn't it?
Right.
I believe, when the Supreme Court said they decided 2 things. One, they decided that it was there was no right to privacy per se, the same as the Dobbs decision, for the state of Florida in our Constitution, which then the 6-week ban then would take effect on May 1st. But then they also allowed the language for this very horrible pro-abortion Amendment 4. They allowed this to be put on the ballot in November, which means abortion with no restrictions through all 9 months of pregnancy, with no ability to do anything about it on a state level, would go into effect if voted in the positive in November. And the problem is both of these things caused a situation, I believe, in Florida where because the other side is going to call this 6-week ban too extreme, which it is not, and really won't. I mean, people need to understand that with all those loopholes, abortion is still happening. I don't know if you know this, Jim, but I've been paying very close attention, especially in Southwest Florida, in Naples, Fort Myers, and Sarasota, as well as the abortion clinics that are not Planned Parenthood in Gainesville. The Planned Parenthood abortion clinics in Southwest Florida are operating at full steam. They have not slowed down at all. I attempt to get an appointment to have an abortion there regularly, and abortion, there are barely any time. They won't even do a consult. They send me to Orlando. They send me to other areas further away. So abortion is going strong in Florida as of today, which is May the 28th. And this ban has not slowed the abortion industry down at all. And the reality is the other side is going to use this as fodder to scream to the public that this law is too extreme and that they should vote yes on this amendment, which would enshrine abortion in our state constitution, would be absolutely devastating. So it's a very serious battle, and we have to remember that language matters, and the way we speak about these things matter. And if we aren't bold about the reality of what's going on, the reality that even with all this legislation and all this attempt to nitpick and what do I want to say, legislate abortion out of existence, it hasn't worked in 50 years. That's never worked. And every time the pro-life movement per se says, oh, look at this, we've got a 6-week ban with 85 exceptions. Isn't that great? Babies are going to be saved. The reality on the ground is that babies aren't being saved, not in the numbers that they would want you to believe. And the only states in which we've seen some actual abortion numbers go down are states like Texas and Alabama, and places where they passed laws with no exception. And so the problem is that's not what's going on in Florida, and I think it's going to really hurt us long term here.
Mm-hmm. All right, and some form of actually being able to enforce things, which, as you're saying, there doesn't seem to be any evidence that anything's even being enforced in Florida. So you can have these laws on the books, they're not doing anything. So this is very important to bring this to the light today. And the Supreme Court case in Florida, that state Supreme Court case, I think the arguments, were probably in Florida. The ruling came down, it looks like April 1st. It's hard to keep all these things straight, but I remember during those arguments, there was great hope that the Supreme Court justice, that the Chief Justice there here in Florida, I also reside in Florida, that he was talking personhood. He was asking about personhood in the arguments, and there was hope that maybe he was going to make a ruling in favor of the person in the womb and say they have a right to life, which would have been wonderful. He didn't go that way. Now we've got a referendum on our hands in the state of Florida. We're going to be talking about this when we get back. Stay tuned.
Ask a Priest live, weekdays at 6 p.m. Eastern on the Station of the Cross. We'll bring you a different priest each weekday where you can participate in a live Q&A on the topics that matter. To get your question in for Father, call 1-877-511-5483 while the show is live. Email us anytime at priests@thestationofthecross.com or visit our show page at thestationofthecross.com/askapriest.
Some atheistic scientists claim we don't need God to explain the universe because science is sufficient to get the job done. But is this true? The answer is no, and here's the reason. Science could never negate the need for God because it can't give an exhaustive explanation of the universe. First, it relies on the inductive method in order to validate its hypotheses. As such, scientists can never be certain they've discovered every piece of data necessary to give a complete explanation. They must always be open to discovering something new that could alter their current theory. Furthermore, science presupposes an existing universe to observe and explain. Thus, it could never explain why the universe exists in the first place rather than not. Science has explanatory power, but not enough power to negate the need for God. I'm Carlo Broussard with a ready reason for Catholic Answers, Catholic.com.
We hear all the time from listeners who discovered the station by seeing a Tri-God bumper magnet in traffic. You can request a free bumper magnet and start evangelizing just by driving around town. Go to thestationofthecross.com and click on promotional material under the About tab. There you can request a magnet for your listening area. We even have one for the iCatholic Radio mobile app. Request yours today.
Welcome back to The Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Pam Stenzel, our special guest today. If you want to call in any questions or comments throughout this program, we welcome you to call in at any time, 1-877-511-5483. Feel free to bring your thoughts, your voice, your questions to the conversation today, 1-877-511-5483. So a couple things, Pam, from what you were saying in that first segment. Number one, I want everybody to understand that we need to understand the absolute truth about what abortion is. If you watch this show with any regularity or listen to this program with any regularity, then I know that you're already there and you know what I'm talking about. But if not, maybe you just stumbled on this today. What is it? What is the reality here? We're talking about murdering a child in the womb of the mother. And even if you look at practices where the child at an early stage of development, a human embryo, a human being, a human person at an early stage of development is maybe even not in the womb, like with the case of IVF, where we're creating human beings in a lab and then freezing a bunch of them indefinitely and treating them like they're products and just transferring them when we want to, when we don't want to, just discarding them, maybe based on just throwing some out because they don't have the traits that the parents would want, or for any reason, just throwing them away. These are still human beings. These are still human persons. And also, when we're talking about abortifacient contraception, so-called contraception, like every single birth control pill on the market, that works also as an abortifacient, where human beings can be conceived. And then part of the way that so-called contraception works is that it does not allow that human being to implant, and it comes out with that woman's cycle, and that's the result of taking those chemicals. So that we would call those abortifacient chemicals. That's what they are. So people need to understand the truth of what we're talking about. We were all that size once. If we just dehumanized and didn't value and each other at that size and just throw each other away at that size, that could be any single one of us. And Pam, this is where I think, where I kind of think we are in the biggest, I guess, disadvantage in this pro-life movement, or maybe the biggest spot where we really need to give more attention and understand that look, with these other horrible human rights atrocities, these other horrible dehumanizations of people and devaluing of people and treating them as property or even killing them if we want to. You can think about slavery. You can think about what was going on with the Jews and other undesirables throughout different times when people who were in power just said, let's get rid of them, or let's just treat them as less than in these horrific ways. You had representatives that were being treated that way that would be able to rise up and speak on behalf of all those who are being oppressed. You think of Frederick Douglass, the great abolitionist. He was enslaved himself. Then he rises up as a free man and starts, talking about the truth of what slavery is and getting people to change their hearts and minds on it. So that, to me, is one of the strengths of what we have with you, is that you're able to tell your story in such a way as to say, look, my father was a rapist. I was conceived in a way that was horrific, and yet I'm still a valuable human being. I'm a human person with the same value as anybody else. Don't dehumanize me based upon the circumstances of my conception. And that goes as well with any child conceived even in a laboratory by IVF, or whatever the case is. Where there is a human being, they are a human being. They are a human person. We ought not to kill them. We ought not to treat them like property. We ought to love them, and we ought to treat them with the dignity that they deserve, that all of us deserve. And so, but the fact is that since we don't have a child in the womb that can speak for itself, that means we all have to be voices for the voiceless there even more. And if we think about our own stories, maybe we can think about how abortion, this time of child murder that we're living through, where it's legalized for the past 50 years and now it's down to the states, and all of this mess we're in, we can see where this all intersects with our own story, and we can start speaking more personally about it as you do when we find how our story intersects. For instance, my grandmother, my great-grandmother, in fact, was pregnant with my grandmother back in the 30s, and she was told to have an abortion. And it would have been illegal at the time, but they still went that route, and she could go to a doctor that she would know would be able to do that. That's how they did it back then. And she said no. She said no. She actually died in childbirth because of the negligence of the doctor at the time. She was in her early 40s, I believe. So they were just saying, hey, you're too old to have a baby. We better just kill the baby. She said no. She gave her life ultimately because of the negligence of the doctor. She didn't think that was going to happen, but She died in childbirth, and that's how my grandma came into the world. And she's a valuable human being. I wouldn't be here if that wasn't the case, if she would have been aborted. My children wouldn't be here. And so, again, to find where our stories intersect and start speaking personally about it. And whenever you hear people talk about exceptions, think about Pam. They're saying Pam should not be allowed to live. They're saying Pam should have been killed in the womb, or it would be fine if Pam was killed in the womb. I won't stand for that. You should not stand for that either. And we need to be 100% clear about what we're talking about. And we need to stand up without exception, without compromise on this. And once we start seeing it like that and start standing up that way, I think then we're going to start really figuring out how to push on to get to the ultimate end of this, where yes, it's illegal in law and it's being enforced, and the culture comes down with thinking this is an unthinkable act, just like they would think about slavery or the evils of Nazism in those times, and all of these other horrible things. We can get there, but we've got to see it for what it is. There are a lot of people in those other times that couldn't see it for what it is and went along with it, were even part of it, said they were following orders or whatever else. Let that not be us. Let us see it for what it is. Stand up for it right now as voices for the voiceless, and do what we're called to do in this time. That's what's going to make the difference. And Pam, you represent somebody to me also. You are somebody to me that I just love having you on. And I'm very grateful that you come on today, because I know you're somebody that we can trust to tell us the full truth, tell it like it is, and you're not playing games. You're not thinking about politics and what do I have to say to please this group or that group, or who I got to please this donor or that donor. You're able to just be fully honest and a person of integrity that we can trust to come on and speak the truth for us, which we greatly appreciate. But anyway, anything you want to respond to there, Pam?
Yeah, Jim. Well, and I guess for me, that's why your voice of clarity has been so important. And I've been it's just an honor to be a part of the Men's March. I was actually, when you first asked me to be a part, I was like, why are you asking me? I'm clearly not a man and I don't identify as such. So, but the lovely thing is that you were saying, hey, these are messages that we need to hear. And I have been so thrilled with the way you have been clearly and consistently and succinctly brought this whole issue in front of the men and said, hey, this is the issue. We're not playing games here. This is the murder of our preborn brothers and sisters. We're not going to call it anything else than what it is. And we're going to ask you as men to stand up and be protectors and answer God's call on your life and to be that voice as men. And I think men's voice has been so silenced in the last few decades. And I think primarily because this was looked at as a women's issue. And then of course, the feminists, even from the beginning, from this 1973 and the whole Roe decision, their big deal was to get men out of it. They made men look like the enemy. Men look, in fact, Jane Roe, who we now know was Norma McCorvey, in order to get the whole Roe v. Wade even looked at by our Supreme Court in the early 70s, she had a claim to be gang raped, which we later found out wasn't even true. But they had to make men look evil in order to so-called justify the option for women to kill their own offspring. And so I just think men's voice has been silenced in a way it never should have been. And Jim, you have been so clear and consistent in calling men to use their voice for truth and to stand up for the voiceless and to stand up for our preborn brothers and sisters and to not have their voice not matter. And I think here's the thing, what Dobbs should have brought to us, Jim, and sadly, I don't know that it did. It should have shown a light very clearly on the only way that we are going to actually see an end to child murder in our nation, and that is personhood. That is to declare personhood on every human being from the moment of conception or from fertilization until natural death, and that our laws, my constitutional rights, didn't begin when I was born. They began at fertilization from the very moment I came into existence. And those rights that I have to life and to liberty and to the pursuit of happiness and to due process and all the rights in the 14th Amendment, all of those rights were mine from the very beginning. And And I did not deserve to be deprived of that without due process, for sure, right? So I think when we go back and we hone this down to personhood, like we almost did in Florida, which was very frustrating, but what we saw done in Alabama, Jim, was, I think, one of a big giant light. In March, the Alabama Supreme Court recognized the personhood in an IVF case, which I thought was brilliant. And I'm like, here we go. This is where this battle is going to be won or lost. And I was absolutely devastated. I happened to be, when this all came down in Alabama, I happened to be speaking at the Babel conference up in Cleveland called Bringing America Back to Life, and a bunch of pro-life people were there, and many of us who have been pushing for personhood for a very long time, and we're a minority, but there we were praising this decision, and we were like, look at what Alabama's doing. This is the beginning. This is what's going to actually make a change. This is the beginning of seeing an end to abortion in our country. And immediately, Jim, within days, if not hours, the Republican so-called pro-life Alabama senator or House rep from Alabama immediately said, oh, we're not going to do anything to IVF. Oh, no, IVF is good. We all love IVF. And Senator Cruz just recently came out, and I've respected him for some time for being pro-life. And he came out and just said the same thing, Jim. And I'm like, you are missing the point, all of you. You do not understand. You cannot have IVF unregulated or even regulated is evil. And they're like, but we want people to get pregnant. Don't you want people to get pregnant? Yes, the way they should be getting pregnant, Jim. Not through a lab. Not at this. You don't sacrifice 50 children and have them all die so that you might be able to carry one to term. This is absolutely horrific. And so, how are we calling ourselves both believers or Catholic or Christians and pro-life and having nothing wrong with this industry that is treating children as property and destroying many children and experimenting on children? This is absolutely horrific.
Right. Yeah, it's really it's a high-tech barbarism is what IVF really is. And so with emerging technologies coming forward, it's only going to get worse if this is the philosophy that people have, which is, let's use technology to do whatever it takes to try to solve infertility without any morals. There's no ethics here. There's no limit. There's no guardrails here. Just whatever it takes using technology. Well, they talk about IVG, which is going to be this way of doing this at scale on a mass level where they do it even bigger than they do it now. They imagine where with technology, they could do thousands of embryos at once and just say, okay, what's the eye color you want again? And what gender and what aptitude, and just kill all the other ones until they find that one that is just like the one that the parents want. So look, we have to say no to these technologies. They are immoral. We're going to have a bunch more when we get back. Stay tuned.
This is Life News Radio. I'm Jim Anderson. Louisiana's new abortion by fraud law may be pulling the mask off an abortion industry seeking to survive the end of Roe v. Wade. Notably, not one female senator voted against the bill that simply lists abortion drugs in a restricted class and makes deliberate poisoning a felony. The reckless and out-of-control online availability of abortion drugs leads to the kinds of stories that inspired the legislation. Legislators focused on one case of an estranged husband who ostensibly sought to avoid child support and poisoned his estranged wife and child. Predators who get women to ingest the first abortion pill leave behind not only the death of a child, but often lifelong disability among survivors. Also, circumstances like ectopic pregnancies mean the pill is too often lethal for mothers without a doctor's supervision. Louisiana addresses problems with the Biden FDA rule allowing these drugs sent via mail without any in-person doctor visit. A recent peer-reviewed article shows that the FDA relied on cherry-picked data to justify its rule. This is Life News Radio. A culture of life has a rarely mentioned but very formidable enemy. Pornography is material that deceives its consumers into thinking that they possess beauty, while the reality is they are possessed by a lie. The first step may be to talk openly with your pastor or confessor, reject the lie, and recognize that a culture of life relies upon you. In other stories, on the heels of a visit by Pope Francis, Canadian Bloc Québécois politicians are seeking provincial power to expand federal Canadian law and end life for the disabled. And the latest abortion figures in the UK show a 17-point jump in abortions for 2022, the latest reporting year. For pro-life headlines delivered to your email address daily, sign up at lifenews.com. This has been Life News Radio.
Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with Pam Stenzel. Today we are talking about some pro-life topics. If you want to get in on this today, any question, comment, 1-877-511-5483. Phone lines are open for you if you want to share something now, 1-877-511-5483. So yeah, there's so many different directions we can go. I'd love to have you on again and even get deeper into some of these things like the IVF and other things. But I want to get back to Amendment 4, this pro-abortion referendum in Florida. This is a very interesting case study for everybody around the nation on what's going on right now. But if you live in Florida, this is very important to see as well in the particular. And so, of course, we want to vote no on this pro-abortion referendum. But this is how it's being billed. And I think you really nail it, Pam, when you say that somehow. So I'm not really sure about all the dealings that went into this with the mainstream pro-life movement in Florida and the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops and whoever else would have been involved, the Republican Party or conservative movement in some way. I'm not really sure exactly, but I know there have been meetings and there have been discussions. And in the end, what comes out is this rhetoric saying oppose this extreme abortion amendment. And I think there's several problems with this. Number one is abortion is intrinsically extreme in and of itself. So it's sort of obscuring that fact that abortion is murdering a child. Is that not extreme enough for you? Why can't we just say this is a child murder amendment? Vote no. Child murder is evil. Why can't we just say that and start trying to actually change hearts and minds on this? I understand that politically people might have arguments to say, well, that's not where people are at and all of this. But what I don't understand why the Catholic bishops aren't able to stand their ground on the moral truth of this. I thought they weren't playing politics, right? I thought they didn't care about political rhetoric and stuff like that. Just proclaim the moral truth, which we have in the Catechism of the Catholic Church 2270. This is not mentioned in what the Florida Conference of Catholic Bishops put out. It just says Florida bishops oppose extreme abortion amendment, vote no on Amendment 4, and then it kind of breaks it down and gives a prayer at the end. But why don't they just copy and paste 2270 from the Catechism? It says human life must be respected and protected absolutely. From the moment of conception, from the first moment of his existence, a human being must be recognized as having the rights of a person, among which is the inviolable right of every innocent being to life. End of quote. Why don't they just paste that in and say, this is against this, vote no, right? Why can't they just proclaim the moral truth and change hearts and minds, which they're always talking about when it's convenient for them? But in this case, they're playing politics and trying to pick up political rhetoric and go that route. It just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. But then the other side, the pro-abortion side, they're using pretty much the same rhetoric. This is where I think it's very insightful what you're saying. The pro-abortion side is saying, well, they're too extreme. These pro-life people are too extreme, trying to ban the whole thing, and they're the extreme ones. So it's basically just two sides saying, you're too extreme. No, you're too extreme. And that it's just kind of like this back and forth, childish sort of nonsense that sort of just gets lost on anybody who I would say would be in the middle on this, which I actually think we can move hearts and minds and move people if we just say what it is and say, are you for murdering children? I think most people, most reasonable people, if we just talk to them like adults, would say, yeah, I'm actually not for it. And I probably just never really thought about it that way before. But Pam, speak some sense into all this for us. How are you seeing this, and what do you think would be good to kind of sort this out? What does Florida need right now?
Yeah, when I saw the language coming down from some of the Florida the Catholic bishops in Florida, as well as the other mainstream pro-life, and they started using the words too extreme. By the way, we're not alone. They're using it in Arizona as well, and some other states that are facing ballot measures in the fall. But what we didn't understand is, number one, it didn't work before. So this has been tried and has failed every time it's been tried, by the way. And then we have the added pressure of the fact that the decision that the Florida Supreme Court made to allow this horrible amendment onto our ballot came down at the same time as they decided that the 15-week ban could stand, which then triggered the 6-week ban. So we're in a worse position to use that kind of language of calling it too extreme, because what you're doing when you use that term is you're pandering to the idea that some abortion is okay, a little bit of abortion is okay, certain abortions in certain circumstances is okay, but we don't want all these abortions all the time for everyone, right? And so the language basically is saying that certain bits of abortion is okay. Well, once you do that, once you allow for some abortions are okay, some are necessary, whatever, then people start to not get on board with you making any kind of restrictions. It brings it back to this concept that it's a personal decision between the mother and her doctor. Or it's not my decision to make, or the state shouldn't be involved. And in this too extreme language, rather than just calling it, Jim, like you said, this is murder of children. And under no circumstances are we okay with murdering preborn children, period. End of discussion. Not too extreme, or some here, or except here, or this, that. The whole too extreme language is going to backfire. I guarantee it's going to backfire. And until we actually call abortion what it is, and have people understand exactly what it is in every circumstance. Abortion is always the intentional killing of an innocent human person every single time. So every abortion is extreme, every single one, not just some.
Right. Yeah. And so, how do you see this in terms of, so you've got the Catholic bishops, and then you've got the Republican Party and the conservative movement now. They're all retreating on life. I think this is an example of it. They're trying to play political games instead of just standing up and proclaiming the truth and actually trying to change hearts and minds in the process while they actually push for the end of this, which now is the time to do it post Dobbs, right? The Roe v. Wade is over. That was the excuse why they couldn't do it before. Now here we are, and they're still playing these political games. So then you look at the leadership in the pro-life movement and say, okay, well, if you had strong leadership in the pro-life movement that was kind of holding these folks accountable and saying, nope, basically what we're saying here, and saying, like, we're not going to let you have a pass on using this sort of rhetoric. No, you've got to go stronger here. And they were basically lobbying the bishops, lobbying the Republican Party in that way, instead of just kind of going along with it themselves. But then again, I think back to the Catholic bishops and the history here, which I've studied some. And if you go back to their 1975 pro-life plan, it's actually very strong. They are the pro-life movement at that point. They are leading the way. They're calling for pro-life congressional districts where it's pro-life people rising up using the parish system and saying, we're going to have these separate groups, and we are going to get people elected who are going to, at that point, the strategy was get a new amendment to end abortion. Now the strategy is, we understand it's already there in the 14th Amendment. We just need to affirm it. And so, but their strategy was get people elected that are going to be in favor of that. And then even if we can't find people that would, that are already there running on this platform, then we're going to build up our own people, and we're going to vote for them, and we're going to get them in there, and we're going to end it. This plan was never implemented. It was then watered down in the second version of the plan, and then watered down even more in the third version of the plan over the decades. And even the plan that we have now, the watered down third version, even that they're not actually implementing throughout each diocese. And this is where we're at. So it's just a shame. So I guess in trying to find solutions here, I think we're both on the same page that, all right, Holy Spirit, like, I guess you point at me, what can I do? What can we do? And let's be faithful. It's not all, the outcome is not something we can say, but we can say whether we're going to be faithful to this moment. But I guess, what do we need right now? What are your thoughts where this is really breaking down? Any solutions that you're seeing?
We need to keep speaking the truth in every avenue that we're given. And so you're doing that through this podcast, Jim. You're doing it through the Men's March. I'm trying to do it in every opportunity that I get to speak on behalf of the unborn on college campuses. We need to be clear. We need to stop making excuses for reasons that we would, well, I'm against abortion, or I'm against the killing of children in this instance, but not in this one. And we need to just, this message just needs to be clear. Now, the one, we all agree that this amendment is horrible and that we should vote no. I mean, everyone across the board agrees.
Right.
The problem is we're not agreeing on how we're going to communicate that clearly to the masses. And when you pick up language that they're going to be using on the other side, and they have more resources, more money, they have everything. We have grassroots. I will say this: they might look like Goliath, and we have the Holy Spirit, and we have the church, and we have our faith, which is huge. So we can be David in the midst of this Goliath. But the reality is, we have to. Jim, this just came to me a little bit. I think some of this, that when as a church, as people of faith, we try to pick up the world's logic and the world's system and how they would fight the war and try to fight like them. I feel like we're kind of David being forced by Saul to put on all this armor to go fight Goliath, and David's trying to put on, this armor, and it's like, doesn't fit. And he's like, just stop it. Can I just go fight Goliath the way I know how, the way I've been fighting lions and bears in the field? And I feel like sometimes the mainstream pro-life movement and the church per se, sometimes through its bishops, wants to kind of take the Davids of the world and just pile on this armor that isn't really going to work in the battle. And some of us just need some courage to say, I'm going after Goliath with my silly slingshot. That's all I've got. But it's what God's given me. And I believe in his favor, and I'm going to fight the battle with my slingshot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And of course, I think they would probably say the same thing about us, that you're ineffective. This is not the way to do it. We're the effective ones. We've got all the data. We've done all of these studies, and we know really the messaging that is needed, which to me, it just doesn't hold up, and the evidence isn't there. And I think it's a very weak argument that they're making, but they're doubling down, tripling down on it. They're not listening. That's like one of the most frustrating things, is you try to not just proclaim it here on a podcast, but you try to talk to people who you think would know better, and you try to have these conversations, but they're going to go with the donors, I think, is the big thing. They're going to go where the big donors are at. And I think you're right on the pro-abortion side. There's a lot of big donors there that are pushing all or nothing. We don't seem to have the donors. I don't know about that, what goes on in the shadows in the world of the donors and the pro-life movement. I know just a little bit that I've seen in kind of research, but there's a whole lot I don't know. But it seems to me that it is clear that if we had big donors that really wanted to push constitutional personhood and really go for it right now and saw what we're seeing, then we'd have a whole lot of pro-life groups and organizations that would be doing it to the full, right? They would do what the donors say. But that's not what we're seeing. So to me, I think that's probably the level that we're at. We need some big donors who want this and are willing to really invest in it, instead of just the stuff that's not working, the same old stuff of what we're seeing here. So yeah, of course, vote no on this child murder referendum in Florida and all these other ones in all these other states. But talk to your friends and family, your coworkers about it in that way. Say, hey, there's another child murder referendum amendment here. Are you for murdering children in the womb? Talk to them like that. We can do this in a gentle and loving way and still be true to the reality of what it is we're talking about. I think that's the other thing. They would point the finger and say, just because we use the term murder, which Mother Teresa used, which Pope John Paul II used to talk about this reality, and Pope John Paul II said we have to use that word to really say what this reality is, just because we're using the truth of words here, they say, well, that's somehow mean, that's somehow ineffective, that's somehow too extreme. And again, these arguments don't hold up. Pam, can you give us the last word before we hit the break and then go into the final segment?
Speak the truth, Jim. That's what we have to do. Speak the truth, and people will respond to it. We can't candy coat it, make it look pretty. It is what it is, the intentional murder of an innocent human being. And we've got to keep saying that. Otherwise, the too extreme just is going to fall flat completely.
Right. Yeah, I agree too. We do take it seems there's a lot where it's just, well, the world's doing it this way. That seems pretty good. I guess we'll use the world's model. Now, how about we actually pray and say, God, how do you want us to do it? And let's be faithful to that. We're going to be back with more. Stay tuned.
A prayer to the Sacred Heart that St. Gertrude the Great wrote. I salute thee, O Sacred Heart of Jesus, living and vivifying source of eternal life, infinite treasure of the divinity, ardent furnace of divine love. Thou art the place of my repose and my refuge. Enkindle in my heart the fire of that ardent love with which thine own is inflamed. Pour into my heart the great graces of which thine is the source, and grant that my heart may be so closely united to thine, that thy will may be mine, and that my will may be eternally conformed to thine, since I desire that henceforth thy holy will may be the rule of all my desires and all my actions. Amen.
The Catholic Current, bringing Christ to the world and the world to Christ.
I think we have to go into prayer knowing that we're being contested for.
Oh, yes. If we didn't have guardian angels guarding us, we would be suckers and losers infallibly to immensely superior forces. The devil's terrified of prayer.
The Catholic Current, 5 p.m. Eastern, from the Station of the Cross and on the iCatholic Radio mobile app.
What you're offering and giving to me, you deserve to get back because you're offering more than I can give.
I learned so much through the Station on the Cross. I listen to the radio station daily, and I absolutely love it.
I was attending the chapel and places like that, and through your programs, I was able to find out how other Protestants had come back into the Catholic Church. God bless the Station of the Cross.
Donate today at thestationofthecross.com.
Back to the Simple Truth. Jim Havens here with our special guest today, Pam Stenzel. If you want to get a question or comment in, now's the last chance to do so. Final segment here, 1-877-511-5483. That's 1-877-511-5483. Do want to invite everybody to the next National Men's March to Abolish Abortion rally for personhood in Rochester, New York, Saturday, June 22nd. All the information at themensmarch.com. God willing, I'm going to be there. God willing, Pam's going to be there, and so many others as well. And so we need to come together. We need to proclaim the truth together. We need to stand up publicly together. This is a wonderful opportunity to do so. So we are living through an ongoing daily mass murder of our littlest brothers and sisters. That's a fact. This is happening by the thousands every day in our own nation, the United States, by the hundreds of thousands worldwide, 200,000 worldwide every day. One is too many, but these numbers are just absolutely outrageous. We ought to be outraged. And yet still we can have our hearts and minds putting first things first, which is that our Lord Jesus has given his life in love for us and for every single one of those children, every single one of the abortionists even. And so if we would only turn our hearts and minds to him, and if we would only let him have his way in us and through us, that really is going to be the answer. He's going to show us what we need to do. And this initiative, this men's march and rally, which includes everybody, by the way, especially this one in Rochester, is going to be the first time where we're actually doing something a little bit different. We're going to try it out, keep everybody together for the whole thing. So the women are going to march alongside, along with all the children and everything. We're going to stay together the whole time. That just was something that we discerned leading up to this particular event. So we'll see how that goes, but I think it's going to be good to stick together for this one. But this all comes out of prayerful discernment. Myself and the other co-founder, Father Stephen Imperato, all the men that are involved in the core team and all the folks involved, this thing is soaked in prayer. We've got holy hours. We've got masses before and after the event, the night before, and some fellowship opportunities as well. So again, themensmarch.com is where you want to go to get plugged in for all of that. But we've got to face the reality. We've got to take personal responsibility and understand we have a responsibility in this. We are our brother's keeper. We can't be like the parable of the Good Samaritan, going to the other side of the road and saying, I have nothing to do with this, right? This is going on our watch, in our backyards. And so we've got to take responsibility. We've got to repent of what we've done, what we haven't done, make a new resolve by God's grace to do better, to do more. And this is what this is all about, this Men's March and rally to abolish abortion. We got to start somewhere. And we're trying to do what we can to get this thing moving, that every single child in the womb is a human being, scientific fact, not a religious belief. That means they're also a human person. There's no difference. Every human being is a human person. And so we've got to love them. Now, we can't be killing them. We can't be dehumanizing them. And we all should be standing on this truth. So, Pam, I guess we can go anywhere you want to go in this final segment, but something, I guess one thing I would just maybe ask, this seems to be coming up for me over the break and still is popping up into my mind here, and that is just a sense of healing on all of this. And I think particularly, I was reading through some more of Stephanie Gray Connor's book on IVF, Conceived by Science. It's a very, very good book for people wanting to really go in depth on IVF. And so, again, the circumstances of the conception are evil, but the children that are conceived there are human beings deserving of our love. And so that's what we've got to understand. The same is true in the so-called hard cases, of which Pam is a representative, of rape and incest, that yes, these circumstances are evil, and yet the child that is conceived is a human being. It's not their fault. They are as much of value as we are, and they are lovable, and we need to love them. And so this book talks about those conceived in this immoral state, that IVF, the circumstance of IVF here, the laboratory conception, and that they have some difficult times, and there's healing that those children even need as they ponder and come to understand how they were conceived. We know about post-abortion healing that is available. You can go to lovewillendchildkilling.com, click on the healing tab, lots of information there. Pam, anything you can speak to about the so-called hard cases, being conceived in the immoral circumstance of rape and being a valuable human person? What about healing in your own life? Is that something that that you really, I don't know, I haven't heard you ever speak about it much. I'm just wondering if you might have something to say to folks, especially those that, are in one of these situations, whether it's IVF or rape or incest, and any words that might be helpful to them.
Yeah, I always knew I was adopted. I mean, that was in my family, that was something we talked about, and it wasn't a shock. I knew it from the time I was little and thought it was an amazing, wonderful thing. I did find out as I got a little older that not everybody around me thought adoption was as amazing as I did. But I was a teenager when I actually found out the circumstances around. I think adopted kids, we like to have fantasies about our biological parents and who they were, and they're just two people in love who just weren't ready, or whatever. And then to find out that my biological mother was 15 years old and was in foster care and was raped, sent me into a lot of questions. And I grew up in the Baptist faith, in a evangelical world, and did a lot of memorizing of scripture as a child. And I think my first struggle was theological, Jim. I really struggled with, did God plan me? And was I just a big mistake? And everybody else, where we talk about God has a plan and a purpose for your life. Well, did that really mean me? And struggling with some of the deeper issues of in my evangelical world at the time, between the Calvinists to the, God just takes, did God plan sin, and all of those kinds of questions. And I think for me, it was a point where I realized that God is capable, that God is capable of taking even the worst pain in someone's life and actually using it for His glory. And that was really some of the turning points theologically. And I had a priest tell me, and I thought this was a beautiful thing. He said, Pam, you were not planned, you were ordained. That the moment of conception, you were ordained by God. He had a purpose for your life. And just a little difference in that language theologically really helped me, and to understand that all children, no matter the circumstance of their conception, right? Yeah, through the evil of IVF, through rape, through incest, through all these horrible things, can be ordained by God. That the child themselves is God ordained. And I say that even to the women I've worked with who became pregnant outside of marriage as well. I mean, it's the same thing. It's like, this child is ordained, even though what you did was still wrong. What my biological father did in raping my birth mother was horrible, dirty, stinky, rotten sin. And my existence doesn't justify that sin. But God can take even the most horrible things that Satan meant for evil and actually do something good with it. That's how amazing our God is. That's redemptive. Our God is redemptive. And we have to believe that and know that there's redemption in the lives of these children, and to hang on to that. And so God can redeem all of our circumstances. That's what's so beautiful. God can take even what the evil one meant for evil and redeem that if we give Him a chance to do that. And so we need to be doing it. And I'm going to throw this out. It's going to be really controversial right before we end, Jim. But all this discussion with IVF and everybody believing that people have a right to biological children, as if, you know what I mean, that I can do all scientific manner of things because I deserve the right. The infertility rate that we're seeing right now, the increase in it is greatly due to bad decisions made prior to marriage, right? STI infection, multiple years of using birth control, all of those decisions for a lot of our people led to their infertility. And now we want to even make worse decisions to fix a problem that was probably induced for the most part by our own decisions.
Yeah. Very important topic that Pam has been outstanding on at the front of now for many, many years. I just want to highly recommend you go to enlighten.com. Is that what it is? Enlighten.com?
Enlightencom.com.
Enlighten.com. Yep. Okay. Got it. Enlightencom.com. Enlightencom.com. Get in touch with Pam. Bring her to your parish. Bring her to your events. This is a voice that we need to hear more of. We're going to.
Hi, my name is Nathan Wigfield, Executive Director of the St. Thomas More House of Prayer, a Catholic retreat center in Cranberry, Pennsylvania,